Okay, so Star Wars Outlaws is here. We're gonna do some benchmarking with the game. We're gonna do some live settings demonstrations where we can show you how different settings sort of affect and impact the performance. We're gonna be doing that today with the help of NZXT's custom PC. So they sent this to us, which was a custom build, pretty high end actually. 7800 X3D, RTX 4090, 32 gigs of 6000 megahertz RAM, NZXT motherboard, and all that's crammed into an NZXT H9 case. Anyway, huge thanks to NZXT for sponsoring today's look at Star Wars Outlaws. I'm a huge Star Wars fan and I'll prove it in a second. But you guys can get 5% off any of NZXT's either pre-built player PCs or custom PC built through their configurator. So go and check them out in the description at the end of this video. NZXT is a quick and easy way to get a new gaming computer. Build a gaming PC on your budget using the built-in configurator and see exactly how your favorite games will perform. And if you don't want to spec it yourself, then choose from NZXT's pre-configured player PC systems designed to fit your needs and budget. And now NZXT is proud to announce NZXT Flex, a PC gaming subscription service with no commitments, with upgrades every 2 years, and comprehensive customer support with active subscriptions. To see the full lineup of NZXT PCs and Flex options, follow the sponsored link in the description below. Look, I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. This is actually a retired Star Destroyer Ultimate Collector's Series Lego. And I have built just about every other Ultimate Collector's Series Legos that there is. I've built the Venator. I've built the Millennium Falcon. I have built the A-Wing. I have built the X-Wing. I have built the new TIE Interceptor. I have built Luke's Skyspeeder, or Skyspeeder? No, just Land Speeder. And then I have others that I haven't built, like the Razor Crest and the Y-Wing. And I'm currently trying to source one other I forgot. But anyway, yeah, I'm a little bit of a dork, okay? So when I have the opportunity to look at Star Wars Outlaws and get paid to do it, you bet your ass I'm gonna do it. So shilling aside and jokes aside, I am really grateful to be able to look at the game. In fact, the last Star Wars game I took a look at was actually Fallen Order. I didn't play Jedi Survivor, I should have, but this is also interesting because it's an Ubisoft title, not an EA title. So when's the last time we had a non-EA title Star Wars game? So this should be interesting. Yeah, apparently NVIDIA and exploding CPUs are, so that's why the build, we chose a 7800 X3D from the NZXT's custom build configurator. So we all know the 7800 X3D is by far the absolute POG. When it, is that how the kids say it? POG? It's POG? That's why AMD is the POGers. Okay, so anyway, we're at Mos Eisley right now. You can see I've got some stats up on the screen right here. I'm gonna do a couple different things just so you understand the way we're gonna do this. It's not just a live play. I'm gonna show you live play and settings and how it affects FPS and how it affects the fidelity of the game so you can see which settings have a bigger impact on performance and which ones you can kind of ignore and not waste your time with because they don't really affect performance too much. But also, I'm gonna take this 4090 out of here and we're gonna actually do some benchmark runs where we're gonna compare different cards. We'll put like a 4090 in here, maybe a 4080, maybe like a 4060 Ti, maybe like a 7900 XT, maybe like a 7800 XT, get a few GPUs going. That way we can then show you in a graph, in a time graph, how the FPS is actually affected with those very same settings. So regarding settings, we are in 1440p. The reason why I'm choosing 1440p is a few reasons. One, it's the higher represented resolutions right now when it comes to the Steam profile or the Steam survey. So 1080p has kind of been replaced now with 1440p panels because they've become so affordable. 4K is still a pretty small minority and a lot of ultra wides actually making a rise there. So 1440p is really kind of like the main body of what panels or resolutions people are running. Also too, this is a 4K panel, so if you notice any fuzziness, most of that's gonna be because of the fact that 1440p and 4K are not a 1-to-1 pixel ratio, so we get kind of a weird blurring on some of the pixels because of the fact that they cannot just simply use 4 pixels to make 1080p in a 4K panel. Resolutions don't work that way. So 1080p is actually 1/4 of the resolution of 1440p, which is why you can get it to actually look okay-ish on 1080p versus 1440. But I wanted a big enough screen for you guys to be able to see. So here's our settings. We're exclusive full screen. It's 120 hertz panel. The cinematic frame rate's not locked. No frame limiter on, so it can obviously go above 120 as you can see right here. No reflex going. Upscaler is DLSS. And I want to point this out. We had a little bit of a debate. Should we turn on DLSS or not? And the reason why I'm turning it on is because I feel like enough titles now utilize DLSS that it is a feature set to NVIDIA that needs to be used when available, because most of the time now with DLSS, you really don't notice much of the upscaling resolution difference, but you definitely notice the impact in performance. So AMD cards will be using FSR because that's what's available to NVIDIA, or excuse me, to AMD graphics cards. So I choose to leave that feature set now turned on, where in the past, when not many titles utilize DLSS or ray tracing, we turn that stuff off by default. Speaking of ray tracing, this title forces it. You absolutely cannot turn off ray tracing entirely in this title. You do have some control over the ray tracing. However, every card must use ray tracing in this title. Now, those cards that don't have native RT accelerators in them, AMD and NVIDIA cards that don't have them, will do it on a software level. So you can imagine older cards at this point that do not have, let's say 20 series NVIDIA cards or newer, or 6000 series AMD cards or newer. If you don't have one of those cards, you're gonna see a fairly non-exciting experience playing this game, which might mean this is the first title that's actually kind of forcing maybe a hardware upgrade in your future to get respectable frame rates in this title. So I just wanted to point that out. Ray tracing is required for this title. We could use FrameGen to definitely give ourselves a pretty big impact and uplift in performance. The downside with FrameGen is there's some increased latency when it comes to your mouse clicks and your keyboard movements and stuff. This is a shooter title. So reflex and the amount of response time in terms of you reacting to what's on the screen is going to be very important. So if you're reacting to something that's got extra latency between when you're seeing it and when your input is being received by the game, FrameGen is one of those things that you may or may not want to turn off or on, depending on how sensitive you are to those types of latencies built into the controllers. So I just wanted to point that out. We'll see how it does in a moment. So we're going to leave ray reconstruction off. Ray reconstruction in this title is basically an increase or an optimized denoiser for the ray trace reflections and such that are in this game. However, turning it on forces the base setting on a lot of the other ray tracing quality settings in this title to be bumped up in resolution when it comes to the reflections in ray tracing. So turning on ray reconstruction will make the ray tracing look better, but it's kind of a bigger performance hit, not because you turn that on, but because it turns on other ray tracing settings at a higher setting than if you just leave it off. So for this test, we'll be leaving it off because we are looking for a balanced gaming performance rather than just what's the prettiest image. If you want the prettiest image, obviously turn everything on and it's gonna cost you a ton of frame rate. Okay, so our upscaler mode is set to fixed and our upscaler quality or DLSS quality is set to quality. So this is a 4090. There's no reason why we wouldn't do quality. It's kind of sad we even need to turn on DLSS at all for a 4090, but as you'll see, for frame rates, it's actually kind of needed. So anyway, if we go over here to the graphics settings, we're on high, and I know it's kind of under my overlay here, but we're on high. And then chromatic aberrations on, film grains on, depth of field is high, motion blur intensity is all set to the defaults. So you have camera motion blur intensity, that's when you move the camera around, how fast does the world blur? And then you have per object motion blur intensity. So let's say you're sitting there and like a speeder whooshes by, the speeder will be blurred, but the rest of the scene won't be, because that's kind of how it would work in real life. So RTX direct lighting is basically another way of calling it fully path traced, which is what we've talked about in the past when it comes to Phantom Liberty for Cyberpunk 2077. It is a significant hit to performance. So by default, ray tracing is on for the sun and any of the like world lighting or skylights coming through buildings and such. So that is on by default. But if you were to turn this on, then you're gonna start doing full path tracing for any sort of light source that is in the scene or outside of the scene that could be affecting the lighting of where you are. So we're talking about lamps, we're talking about overhead lighting, we're talking about someone lighting a cigarette. You know, any of that stuff would be fully path traced. So as you can imagine, that would be a huge hit to performance. We'll turn it on to show you, but when we do the benchmark stuff, what you see now with it off and all that, that's the way that we're running it. Okay. Enough chatting here. We do have an advanced. This is where you can go in and customize everything on a very detailed level. There's a lot of stuff that you can go in here and change. This is when you do the preset. This is the stuff that gets selected. So we just left it high, which is why most of this is high. If you want to know more about what each one does, fortunately, they have a little demonstration on the right that explains what all of that does. Okay, so let's run around right now. You can see this is the landing port. This is actually where the Millennium Falcon is in pretty much all the movies where the Millennium Falcon's in Mos Eisley. And so as you can see right now, it's pretty consistent. We're getting 180, 170, 180s. Again, a 4090 with DLSS on right now. But you're gonna notice something. You might be seeing it already. There's artifacting. The artifacting we thought might have been graphics card related, but we tried several different graphics cards and noticed that the artifacting is just the title, unfortunately. We tried it in windowed mode, we tried it in exclusive full screen, we tried it in native resolution, we tried it with DLSS off, we tried it with DLSS on. It's gonna get real bad when we go outside. So this is unfortunately a new title thing. We still are living a generation where we cannot get a fully functioning game without bugs at day one. But watch as I'm running around out here. Yep, big one right there. Oh, I can pet these guys? Oh. Okay, so running around right here. Oh, there was a big one. Hopefully the camera picked it up. There's some more, there's some more. There's more. Whoa. Jeez. Okay, there's your proof. I didn't do that. Now, fun fact, this is actually Phil's game save, and he said he has seen artifacting in this game, but not in this exact spot. So it's kind of weird where it does and doesn't show up. Now, to be fair, he's playing on a 14900K with a different 4090. It's an RS 4090 card. So you just kind of, I guess, have to deal with it. This is the kind of thing that's gonna pop up, I think, with new titles, and it takes time for them to get it all figured out. Okay, so let's just kind of look off in the distance right here and see we're at 158, 156, 54, 56. You can see it's pretty consistent on my graph right here. GPU is only at 50C, 95% usage. What's funny is the frame or the megahertz are actually quite low. This tells me the GPU is not being fully utilized. And our CPU is at 65C. It's only about 60% usage, and it's running at 4.85 all-core average, and only pulling 70 watts. So it's clearly more of a title optimization thing regarding the GPU not being fully used versus it being any sort of a bottleneck thing. Because our CPU is definitely not bottlenecking this GPU at all. So I think there are gonna have to be some improvements when it comes to Outlaws, which I think we all were expecting, to be honest. Okay, so let's just do this. Let me just go now to Ultra. So you can see we dropped about 20 to 30 FPS right there alone by just changing it to Ultra. Now here's the fun thing. You can't really notice a difference. There's not much of a difference. And that's actually something people have talked about with this title, is between low and Ultra, there's not much difference between the way the scenes look. Now, to be fair, this is a very sandy, drab colored area. So it might be a little bit more obvious if you were, say, in like a foliage area or like a forest or something, but you know, we've got our harsh shadows right here, our hard shadows right there. You can see they do tend sort of soften in the distance, but not too much. Anyway, shadows are obviously present. You can see the quality of the shadow isn't great. It's kind of flickering on the edges right there. Let's turn on direct lighting. Shouldn't have a whole lot of effect right here, to be honest, because we're outside. I think if we go inside, we'll notice more of an effect because that's where other lights are gonna start coming into play. Although it did drop us under 100, well, for a moment there. So we're at 100, there's 99. But as you can see out here, it doesn't look much different. It really doesn't. Now we go from hard shadow to soft shadow, which is exactly how it would work, because the closer that the thing blocking the light is to the point of it being blocked, it's sharper, and then light starts to wrap around, which then starts to give you a softer shadow edge. So as you can see, this is much more realistic looking shadow. Let's go into the cantina over here, or as Phil calls it, the Sega cantina. He said it looks like Sega. Anyone recognize that blaster spot on the wall?
Technically, it shouldn't be there because Han shot first.
Comment below if you still think Han shot first. Let's just see what happens to our FPS now if I turn that off. But more importantly, let's see what happens to the scene. And we were also on high direct lighting. So let's go to low real quick. And so we gained about 15 FPS. But I don't notice a difference, honestly. So let's go ahead and turn that setting off. Unless you're pixel peeping and putting screenshots next to each other, you're not gonna really notice much of a difference, but you notice it there, right? You definitely notice it here. Let's go back to looking at him. That's where I was at 100. Yeah, 60 FPS increase right there. So you can see why I said we're leaving it off. Also too, let's go to low settings now. First of all, not a huge improvement in FPS, some, but there's not much of a difference between ultra and low. That's the crazy part. Now here's the thing. here's what we can do. We can put up some shots on the screen right now where Phil actually did some side-by-side comparisons, and you'll notice that between like low and high settings or even ultra settings, there's very little difference between them. So this is one of those things where you can actually feel like you're not leaving a whole lot on the table in terms of how good the game looks, but actually dropping your settings. Now I think as PC enthusiasts, a lot of us are like, I want to crank the settings because the length of my EPEAN is directly related to the settings I choose to put my games at and the FPS I get. And that 4090 EPEAN and settings are directly proportionate. One thing I want to point out though is you might notice that the more I was running around in here, in this area, the less artifacting I got. So it's very common. It's very possible that it was partially due to it still loading textures and stuff. So I don't know what that is. I hope it's something that Ubisoft will address sooner than later, because that would definitely be like a bad experience. All right, so let's do this. We're gonna go ahead and do our benchmark runs right now, and then we'll talk about, I guess the kind of performance, like GPUs and such that you really need for this. It is sort of a CPU heavy title, mostly when it comes to loading, when you're fast traveling and stuff like that. But it is definitely, as you can see, a GPU intensive title. I think there's a lot of optimizations that are needed with this title though. So for the benchmarks, I wanted to kind of do a sampling of NVIDIA and AMD graphics cards to sort of give some perspective of what your performance would be like depending on the kind of graphics card you have. So obviously we did the 4090 because that's what was already in the system. I did a 4070 Ti Super, skipping 4080 altogether, because that definitely covers the upper mid-end before you get into the ultra expensive $1,000 plus graphics cards. And then a 4060. The 60 series GPUs still tend to have a massive representation on the Steam survey on what people are really running when it comes to their GPUs. So 60 series cards, 3060, 4060, and even some 4060 Ti's. So 4060 was kind of like right in the middle there. And then for AMD, a 7900 XTX to see what the biggest, baddest GPU from AMD currently is able to offer. A 7900 GRE over a 7800 XT, because I feel like the current price point of the 7900 GRE is extremely competitive for the performance that you get. So I thought that that made sense. And then instead of doing like a 7700 XT, we rolled it back to a 6000 series GPU like the 6750 XT. So we wanted to see how these GPUs compared with a title that has a minimum requirement of a 1660. So although the GPU is kind of old, it's probably the highest spec on the minimum GPU we've seen required in a long time. In fact, I should have thrown one of those on there, but we really are looking at what more realistic GPUs these days on a hard to run title can do. So it's important to note that the benchmark run here is representative of the run that we did, but it is not the actual run. So as you can see here, as we're in this kind of a loading area, the reason why she starts walking here is the title's loading the next scene. You can see we're getting some pretty steady FPS. 4060 actually down at the bottom there as the red line, but still staying above 60 FPS, and these are running the high settings like we've already talked about. So these are the high settings with DLSS. The AMD cards are running FSR 3. Now, as we start to load and get towards outside, as soon as you can see outside here, we start to get a fairly decent FPS dip. But you can see right here that the 7900 XTX and the 4090 are actually very, very close. And so is the 4070 Ti Super, actually just hanging out there with the big boys. So that was the thing that was actually most surprising as we did this run, is the fact that the 4070 Ti Super at some parts of the test is actually running a little bit better than the 4090. And the reason why we think that is the 4090 is not actually fully loading itself up because of what we already showed with MSI Afterburner, where the GPU will dip down into the high 80s, low 90s on utilization, but the 4070 Ti Super is fully loaded the entire time, just pegged at 99 to 98% GPU usage. Also too, I want to point out that as you can notice in this run, this area is not artifacting. So it's probably something going on in this particular game save data that is causing us to have those artifacts. We'll be looking into that. But every single GPU that was tested here was doing the artifacting. Now, as we got closer to the Cantina, you can see the 4090 definitely started pulling ahead. And it's interesting to note that as this run goes on, the separation between the 7900 XTX and the 4070 Ti and the 4090 start to separate themselves. But at points here, the 4070 Ti Super is above the 7900 XTX. And as you're about to see right here, it got really close to the 4090, but then starts to dip away. And then it's kind of crazy the way that the FPS fluctuates in this particular title. Now let's talk about the lower end cards here. The 7900 GRE is fairly steady, definitely landing in between our two bottom performing cards and our top performing cards. But do you notice how consistent the FPS line is between the 6750 XT and the 4060? They're not having nearly as much fluctuations, even in the harder to run areas, as the faster, higher end GPUs are. They're actually staying very steady, and only once did the 4060 dip below 60 FPS at 59 FPS, but it has stayed above our 60 FPS PCMR minimum benchmark that's required when it comes to running a game. We look at 60 FPS as the bare minimum when it comes to gaming. But that run showed us right there that there's actually a diminishing returns on going with a very high-end GPU versus even something like a 4070 Ti or even a 4070 Ti Super. So this is what that whole run looked like from beginning to end right here without it being drawn across the screen. And this is the part that was surprising to me right here, is that for just a little while, the 4070 Ti Super performed higher than a 4090. But I think one of the reasons why the 4070 Ti is performing above a 4090 at some points here, and then obviously at this part of the test, it really starts to go the other direction as we turn around and look at the world in a wider view, is because of the fact that the settings that are chosen. So these settings definitely don't really benefit a high-end card. They're really more tuned for a mid-range card, and that definitely shows. That's because of the ray tracing stuff. So obviously with the RTX DI stuff that we can turn on, which we already talked about, definitely starts to have a bigger effect on the amount of ray tracing performance that there is. But if we look at the pink line right here, the 7900 GRE definitely gives us a pretty good value at performance to cost, because you can see we're still above 100 FPS the entire time, coming anywhere between about 105 all the way up to about 130, depending on the part of the test that we're in, at a $599 card. Or $490 or $549, depending on where you buy it. It's an incredible value. It's way cheaper than the 4070 Ti. Although yes, the performance is below it, or 4070 Ti Super. I keep forgetting the Super part. Because we needed 3 4070 cards, NVIDIA. Yeah, that's what we all wrote you and said we wanted. Give us more 4070 cards, not make them cheaper. But it still shows right here, as I said, the consistency of the frame rate down here, the 4060 in the red line, or the 6750 XT on the yellow line. It's insane how steady this is. You would think that these would have all had the exact same like linear up and down, but they don't. And that's because these cards were obviously completely GPU bound the entire time. But these cards are hitting GPU bound and leaving GPU bound. So really, the biggest problem Outlaws has going for it is the fact that it does very, very well with lower end hardware. So again, it's not one of those titles that's really making people have to run out and necessarily upgrade their stuff. Yes, it's paired with a 7800 X3D, but that's because we wanted to make sure we weren't dealing with any CPU bottlenecks. We would have to be doing very specific tests here to see what happens with CPU tests, and that would be a completely different video. But I think it actually is doing very well. I mean, the 4060 is still staying above 60 the entire time, except for right there. Actually, I think that is exactly 60, by the way. I don't think that's 59. That's 60 right there. I could go to Excel and click on that dot and it would tell me. But there's the performance. And obviously this is just one very specific part of the game, but it gives us a good indication of what the GPU performance and hit is going to be. So anyway, there you go. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this title regarding improvements as the game progresses and patches come out. Although I don't think we'll see much change regarding engines, because the engine's not new. It's running the same engine that the Division 2 is, Avatar is, so it's been out for a while. It's the same engine that Ubisoft's been using for like so many different games. But I still got to dig in and figure out why the artifacting is happening. Because as you saw in that recorded run, it wasn't happening that was actually on Phil's system. So anyway, new titles, Star Wars sounds, explosions, go out and be an outlaw and kind of pave your own way on the kind of character you're going to be in the game. I've yet to actually play it. I'm excited to sit down and play it. It's just, I've had to do work first. There you go, guys. If you're playing Outlaws, do me a favor, comment down below what your hardware is and what your overall gaming / experience has been. Have you been experiencing the artifacts? Maybe if you have, you can give me some place to start looking. I'm not entirely sure why that's happening. Not happening on my other system, and that's a 7950 X3D. So it's an AMD rig, and it's not happening over there, and it is here, so it's not an AMD thing. And it happened on all 6 of the cards that we tested it on. And one last thing, a huge thanks to NZXT for sending us the custom PC here from NZXT's gaming PC configurator. And you guys can go and get your 5% off by automatically clicking on our link that's in the description below, and get yourself a gaming rig that obviously can be spec'd anywhere in between there and get some pretty good performance. But I know this wasn't the most scientific way of doing the test, but I wanted to kind of get my feet wet on week 1, not day 1, but week 1, to see how Outlaws performs. And it's kind of pleasing to see that you don't have to actually go out like Cyberpunk and just blow stupid amounts of money to be able to turn on any of these. Like we showed on the side-by-sides, the problem this game really has is low looks too good.